intro slide here. Already talked a little bit about my role and who I work for. So most of you have probably seen this map at one point or the other. I believe September 26th, when I took a snapshot of this, we were right in the heart of the drought. This was probably the most, mince my words here, most extensive that this drought had spread. That was probably the worst drought map that we saw was late September into early October. And you can see the widespread issues that we had as a result of the drought. I'm sure many of you felt it here in Fairfield County. I'm from northern Muskingum County. We dealt with a lot of issues through the drought, as well as Noble and Morgan hit extremely hard. I was down there in pastures that looked the color of this wall. There was nothing there, no green, all dirt. So we dealt with a lot of issues, and looking at that, we're going to probably see more issues from a pasture standpoint because of the way we manage those pastures midsummer, even into fall. So the drought conditions for Fairfield County, just to kind of give you guys some perspective. So out of 130 years worth of records, this was the 21st driest year on record. So while it was pretty bad, probably some of the worst ones that I remembered, we're still only 21st on that. There have been 21 drier years than what we experienced this year. The unfortunate part for that is it seemed like everything happened right in the heart of the grazing season when we needed it most. So these were pasture conditions pulled from the National Statistics website, and you can see the good to excellent pasture conditions over the last 5 years, from 2020 to 2024. Tell you, when we started turning cows out this spring at home, I thought it was going to be an excellent year. We had them out on cover crops were that high. We had calves, we were grazing. I didn't have them out on pasture. Things look beautiful. You can kind of see that from where our 2024 started in the months of May and June. We had good to excellent pastures almost all across the state. And then it started to fall off around that June, July time period, depending on which part of the state that we were. And we got to the point where about 3 to 5% of our pastures were in good to excellent conditions by October 13th of this year. So we went downhill very fast from dealing with drought and some of the management conditions. And this one down here is looking at pasture conditions. So 65% of our pastures as of mid-October were in poor to very poor condition. So when we start thinking about those pastures being in that type of condition during that time frame, we have concerns of what the spring what might look like, from overgrazed pastures to being able to get a quick green up, go ahead, in the spring, to potentially having bare areas and having to deal with weed issues and those concerns as the spring comes on and some of those annual weeds start to pop up for us as we come into the grazing season of 2025. So this was a slide that I swiped from a Surviving the Drought webinar that we listened to at the end of September, and that's with Jim Garish. And Jim is a nationally recognized speaker, worked out of the University of Missouri, does a lot of consulting work from the grazing standpoint. But what I wanted to show you is on healthy pastures, yield reductions will be approximately equal to the reduction in rainfall. So for example, if we have precipitation that is 25% below normal, we can expect a yield reduction of approximately 25%. Now that's in healthy, well-managed pastures. Now, as we drive around these areas and we see some of these pastures that are being overgrazed, we can start to compound that effect when we run into drought-like conditions. So if we are overgrazing pastures prior to the drought, we can see yield reductions from 25 to 50%. So if we're down there in that 2-inch to 3-inch range, overgrazing those pastures and continually overgrazing those, we can increase our yield reduction almost 2 times at that point. Whereas if we are continuing overgrazing prior to and during the drought, we can experience yield reductions up to 75%. So you can see as our management changes as we don't rotate and we don't provide rest to those pastures, we can see additional yield reductions just from our management. So from my presentation, if you don't write anything down from this or get anything from my presentation, management makes a difference. How we treat our pastures, how much rest we give our pastures is going to make a difference in the long run. And I had some pictures from our farm where we experienced it firsthand. We had some mess ups and we were paying for those mess ups as a result of it. So management makes a huge difference when it comes to grazing and pasture management. Stole this slide from a good friend in Carroll County that I work with. So this shows the effect of repeated grazing, keeping the plant top short, and it produces shortened root growth. So what we see on top has a direct effect of what's going on underneath. So in overgrazed situations, if we're continuing to overgraze, like in some pastures that we had this summer, you can see keeping that grass at that 2 to 3 inch mark and continually keeping that grass at that 2 to 3 inch mark, how it affects that root growth, and maybe even lower than that 2 to 3 inch mark, how it affects that root growth. So when we run into conditions like we did this summer, most of the summer, obviously that root mass is not there to be able to find that moisture, to continue to scavenge for nutrients that are in there. And then we really run into a serious situation if we have those continually overgrazed pastures. As we move down there, as we start to manage these pastures and provide that additional rest or not take as much off of the top, you can see what that does to the root growth and how it's going to affect us long term, especially when we have drought-like conditions. Those roots, there's more of them. They're obviously a lot deeper, so they can go deeper to scavenge for those nutrients, to scavenge for any excess moisture that may be in there. And that's just a change on the way that we manage it, making sure, you may hear some folks talk about a take half, leave half. So not taking more than half of the top growth will not have a too big of effect on those roots on the underside. So trying to maintain as much top growth, keep it as vegetative as we possibly can, is going to have a positive effect on those roots. And hopefully, when we run into these drought-like conditions like we did this summer, we have better survivability of those plants. So this is our pasture. This is a 17-acre pasture that we have broken up into 1.5 to 2 acre paddocks at home. Broken up with just a single wire fence. This was a pasture that we were on for way too long. We were on it for 4 days. This was during our fair. I thought Dad was moving cows. Dad thought I was moving cows, so they stayed there an extra time. So this picture was taken on October 16th, so almost 2 months after that, and that was the regrowth that we got from overgrazing that pasture in the middle of that drought. You can see the grazing stick, we're looking at 2, maybe 3 inches of growth over those 60 days, whereas these pastures are typically anywhere from 8 to 12 inches, depending on the portion of the paddock that we're in. So that was a major mistake that we made, and we're paying for it now into the future. Now in the fall, we came back and we grazed back over these, but this was a paddock that we skipped just to try and get as much extra growth as we possibly can. But that's what overgrazing during a drought looks like. That's how it affected our regrowth over those next 60 days. How we doing?
Good, how are you?
Doing good. Same field, different management. August 23rd was the last day we grazed cattle in our place before we turned them on to before we put them on a 3 acre field and fed them hay the next month. So we started on August 24th feeding hay. This was the last paddock that we went into. It was grazed for 1 day, October 23rd. This picture was taken the exact same day as the last picture, October 16th. You're looking at heights of around 6-7 inches here, pushing 8 inches in that area, and that was pretty common across that field. Fertility's pretty much the same. There's a little bit change in aspect and height of slope in this area. But most part, these were limed in the fall of 2023. But again, wanted to show the difference in what that management does. Being on there, leaving as much residual grass as we possibly could in this paddock. We had very good regrowth in this area, and we were able to come back and graze this paddock again in the fall. That was able to help us stretch our hay supplies a little bit by having that grass there. And this is just one more field. The last time this one was grazed was early July, so really before we really started to hit, severe drought in our area. We're looking at heights in there 10, 11, 12 inches in that paddock. This one we don't graze as often because we have to build the fence around it, so sometimes we're a little bit lazy. We have off-farm jobs, so we don't always get to it. So this one wasn't as grazed as much as some of the other paddocks, but that picture again was taken the exact same time, October 16th, just to show the difference in the grass heights. We still had green grass at that point. We went back through and we grazed this one more time into the fall, late October and into early November, just to help us extend our hay supplies. So really saw this type of really saw the change in the management and where we had a mess up to where we did things, I won't say correctly, but we did things better, and how that affected our forage growth, and how we persisted into the fall before things really went dormant. So I'm going to talk a little bit about drought management strategies, and I know we're way past this, but some of the things that producers had to make these decisions as we were in June, July, August, into September. So some things that producers were doing, you guys probably did this in your system and your management as well, is looking to reduce the stocking rates, whether that was weaning calves early, selling some cattle that may have been lame, may not have bred back, may have been outside your breeding window. So making those decisions to reduce those stocking rates, put less pressure on the pastures, and ultimately, I know it's a worry of ours, and it's probably a worry of some of you guys in this room, is extending those hay supplies, making sure you have enough hay to get through till the grass starts growing again. Putting animals on a sacrifice area. I said earlier, we put our animals on a three-ish acre lot and fed them hay from August 24th to October 1st, just to extend that, be able to rest our pastures, so we didn't do what we showed you in the first picture where everything was at 2 to 3 inches and we didn't get that grow back. Controlling weeds, that's a little bit, some of you might cringe a little bit. Spraying may be an issue during the drought with the lack of moisture. We cannot get anything to, more than likely there won't be any uptake of that, so you'd be wasting that chemical there. We had some issues with cockleburr. We went through and clipped. It seemed to control things fairly well on our pastures, but being able to control those weeds to not compete with the desirable stuff that we need, whether it's our orchard grass or the clovers and that type of stuff. So controlling those weeds during that drought so they don't compete for nutrients and moisture. And then ultimately having a drought management strategy. Having those contingency plans, being able to think about that prior to being in the middle of a drought or being in the middle of a wet period where we have to make those decisions so we can save those pastures for grazing down the road. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we get into looking at some grazing of haying areas, when we talk about heavy moisture areas and how that affects some of the yields on it. But not to spend a whole lot of time because we're kind of past this. Ultimately, do not overgraze. And showing that slide, I think really hammers that point home, not overgraze, and how we can affect those pastures by doing that, especially during times when we're having drought.
You said that you fed till the first part of October, so what did you do after that?
So we went back through our paddocks. We had so we're understocked right now where we're at. As far as the number of cattle that we have. So we have the 17-acre field that we rotated through. We stopped on August 23rd and then put them on what we call our nursery lot. So it's a lot that we kind of save for the spring that we kick the cows, and get calves out on, let them graze. And it's right there by the driveway, right there by the house, we can see everything. So we put them on there. And then we have an additional 10-acre winter lot that we hadn't touched since early July. We left them off that. And then we have another 4 to 5 acre lot that we didn't touch as well. So we left them on there in October. We started to get a few more rains, and as those rains came back, we were hitting about 6 to 7 inches. So we went through and ran the cows through again. Corn came off late October for us, and when that came off, we kicked cows onto corn stalks, and we left them out there for about 45 to 50 days with a couple of bales. So that was able to buy us into almost December, late December, before we went back to our winter lot. And then we just kicked them over there, what's today? We tried to make it to January 1st. We didn't quite make it, but about to Christmas, we kicked them on there. That bought us an additional 10 days. We put hay out for them and left it alone. And now we're just feeding hay entirely at this point. And then supplementing corn a little bit, about 2 pounds to 3 pounds of corn per day for our cows right now, and we up it a little bit when we start getting 1 degree, 2 degrees. So that's where we're at. We're still sweating to make sure if we got enough hay, but that's how we kind of managed through it after we put them on that sacrifice lot, being able to go back, graze a little bit, and extend it as much as we could. And we pulled in a 10-acre hay field and let them on that as well, just to kind of extend that time and extend our hay supplies a little bit. So having that sacrifice area, that could be a grass lot, that could be a lot like this that's aggregate. This is Kevin Swope's place. It's a friend of ours in Carroll County. This is how he managed through that drought. He pulled everything in, put them on this lot, and fed hay to save his grass into the fall and be able to stockpile that grass so he could graze a little bit into the winter. For me, I think a sacrifice area is a great tool, like almost like a Swiss Army knife for any grazers out there. Being able to use it as part of your rotation or be able to pull it off of pastures to help you have some time to make those decisions on what you're going to do to get through either extended dry periods or extended wet periods. I think it's a great way to help you save your pastures, make sure that we don't have any additional damage to those pastures, whether it's during drought or during an extended wet period. Great tool to have in your toolbox, or even just having a sacrifice lot area that you have good water access to, and that's why we picked our sacrifice area at home the way that we did. We could get water to it and make sure that they had water throughout that drought. Because we struggled, our springs were dry. We ended up running 300-400 feet of hose down to one of our tanks and putting it on a float. So we were able to have that water there on demand for those cows. So managing fall grass height. You saw those pictures a little bit earlier from mid-October at our place. That's going to be important moving forward. And again, we're past that management point right now to make those decisions. But looking ahead for the fall grazing season of 2025, I think it's important to think about that as you go into winter. You've grazed it all summer. You move into fall, allowing those grasses to build their root system, put those carbohydrates back into their roots so before they go dormant. Not only it helps for survivability of the plant through the winter, it'll allow you to get some additional grazing out of it by stockpiling those grasses and going across that and then grazing it once it becomes dormant, so we don't have any survivability issues, we don't have any overgrazed issues as we go into winter. So that's important to manage it. This is, so the sacrifice area, this is also Kevin Swope's farm. He does a lot of stockpile grazing, and he manages his fall grass to try and get as much growth as he possibly can, so he doesn't have to feed hay early into the winter. He'll rotate through just like he would in the spring and into the summer, and it works extremely well in his system. changing the management, not knowing how everybody manages their operations here, but changing that management to try and get as much fall growth as we can, will help extend those hay supplies, will help reduce that cost from overall stored feed. So this is probably still on a lot of producers' minds out there, is extending those hay supplies. There's a lot of options out there that we can be looking at, especially this year with the supplemental feeding of corn. Looking at corn stalks, looking at supplemental feeding wherever you get. It could be Stiller's grains. Those are still relatively cheap. Corn right now compared to hay prices is relatively cheap. So looking at extending those hay supplies and even looking at possibly grazing hay fields like we had mentioned a little bit earlier. So when we start looking at corn stalks, we're grazing standing corn. I know we're a little over in the corn belt in Fairfield County, so grazing standing corn might sound like blasphemy, but I've worked with producers that do it, and they've done it fairly successfully. Looking at 75 cows on, I think it was 5 acres. That he put those on. Now the management considerations that we look at grazing corn stalks and standing corn, we put out a bale of hay when we turn them out on stalks, just so it's not from grass straight to stalks. Give them some roughage in there, just give them additional option. More than likely, they won't touch it. We find that at home. For us, I mean, they'll pick out a little bit, but it extends, it might be a week to 2 weeks before they finish the bale. But looking at that, this came from the University of Nebraska. It was something that I found, and I believe it was an extension article as well. But for every bushel of corn produced, you have 18 pounds of stem, 16 pounds of husk and leaves, and a little under 6 pounds of cob. So being able to have about 3 tons of dry matter per acre on an average field of 150 bushel, that is very useful and very helpful for producers this fall if you have the ability to graze corn stalks. I know it extended our supplies quite a bit and was very helpful to us. If you have that ability to fence those off or have something next to your farm to be able to do that, or a neighbor that you could work with, it's a great way to fill in some of those forage gaps throughout the year. If you leave the standing corn at 150 bushels, that's roughly an additional 8,400 pounds of grain in addition to what that standing dry matter would be there. So trying to do that math and get through the winter with your animals and planning through that is a good option to help extend those hay supplies. And those grazing days will vary, based off what the weather is. Those stalks will start to break down as we get additional moisture. For us, it lasted somewhere around 45 to 60-ish days. I don't remember exactly how long we were out there, but we can push it as far as 120, depending on what type of weather that we have. And I started with the management considerations, but never did finish that thought. Especially if you're going to graze standing corn, stripping that out and giving them only enough to clean up on a daily basis. That way we don't have to worry about issues of overeating, bloating, things like that, and give them a bale along with it. The producer that we worked with, that I first saw do this, had 75 cows on that 5 acres, and he cut his hay consumption almost in half by adding that corn into it. He planted it just like you would for a grain crop, and it helped him significantly as far as overall hay production. He had the cost of putting that corn in. Don't ask me the numbers, I've never run them as far as comparison of the hay for the corn, but it's a good option to be able to add that energy into the animal's diet. So supplementing corn, we were very fortunate to get a hold of a bin last fall, and we filled that bin this year, approximately about $165 to $170 a ton is what that cost us when we bought it back in August. Right now, it's economical to purchase corn to supplement beef cattle. This is the Mount Hope market report for hay at the beginning of the year. You're seeing prices upwards to for alfalfa, $550 a ton. And mixed first cutting grass hay, $325 a ton, so significantly more than what it's gonna cost for corn. Not saying we're changing the animal's diet all the way over to corn, but it's a great way to supplement it, to help extend those hay supplies, what we have. Great energy source for those animals right now, especially when we start seeing these colder temperatures get into this weather. But you can kind of see where those prices are versus where corn is. And that was the last price I got. I called mid-December. I think they were at $4.73 a bushel is what Heritage was at out of Nashport. That's the closest mill to me. That may have changed a little bit, but looking to extend those prices, extend those hay supplies. Corn's a good option as well as, you know, distiller grains and other things that are out there. Grazing hay fields. Some of you may do it. It's something that we've done for probably the last 10 years at our place, and I will say that we've seen it successfully done, and we've seen it unsuccessfully done. We've damaged our yield into the spring by keeping animals out there when it's too wet. We plugged it up and it damaged our yield, but we've also had yields where years where we've increased our yield by putting those animals out there, putting the urine, putting manure back in. We've increased those yields, so that's where we're talking about from a nutrient management standpoint, letting those animals put that NP and K out there for you and recycle those nutrients into your hay field. Feed quality. Standing forage almost always is better quality than what stored forages are. So if you have the ability to fence out the hay field, you can get water to it. It's a good option to be able to not only make a couple cuttings, stockpile it, graze those fields into the fall, making sure that you manage those fields. You don't keep them on there when it's too wet, because you will reduce your yield the following year if it's too wet. But having that feed quality, standing forage is gonna have better protein content, it's gonna have higher digestibility versus what your stored forages are gonna be. And it's a great tool to be able to renovate some of your hay fields if you want to. If you wanna overseed them with clovers or something else, you can graze those fields down tight, overseed in the spring, and renovate those hay fields that way. So it's just another option to be able to do that without completely killing everything and starting over. As we look ahead to the 2025 grazing season, some options that we can have if hay supplies are concerned, if you think you're gonna be short. What we're gonna talk about a little bit, and I know Jason's gonna cover it, and we'll see in my last slide on this presentation, is filling in those gaps from a forage standpoint, being able to graze as long as we possibly can. So what we have coming up in the next couple of months, I'm just gonna focus on here, looking at cover crops. If you have access to a field where you put cover crops on, that's a great way to start out the spring. March, April timeframe, being able to put those animals out there, that'll allow your pastures to rest, and I'm sure Bob will probably cover that, making sure that those pastures have plenty of regrowth before we put animals back out on it. And cover crops are a great way to be able to do this. This is cereal rye that was broadcast at about a bushel an acre in October of 23, and we had cows on it early April to late April, being able to graze that. They seem to like it really well. Reason we didn't turn them out sooner is we only have one strand around our crop field, and with the little calves, it made us a little bit nervous to be able to turn them out any earlier than that. But a great way to help extend that. We did it again this year, about the same rate into corn stubble. So we're still kind of waiting to see what this will look like for us, but we're still planning on using it.
Did you put that on the cornfield that you grazed stalks?
Yes, we did.
Before?
Yes.
Before you grazed?
Yes, we did.
So the cattle help?
In theory. I mean, I got pictures of some of the rye about up like that, but it was very hit and miss before the snow went on. Some areas were thicker than others, but yeah, the corn came off late October, early November, and I think I had everything broadcast on by November 8th. And then the cows were out there in the middle of it for some of it when we broadcast it on. But looking at annuals as well, and then doing some frost seeding, and then, you know, that's just within the next few months that I wanted to talk about and cover. Again, it's another picture of grazing cover crops there at home. And this is a sort of Sudan grass that is a good annual, gives a lot of tonnage. Those are probably 4 weights, I guess, and you can see they're pretty well covered up by that sort of Sudan grass. The management challenge with the sort of Sudan grass, especially when we start getting into dry years like we have, is they can build up some nitrates. So that's one thing to watch out for. But, you know, under good conditions, you know, adequate moisture, we can get a ton of growth and a ton of forage out of these summer annuals, and be able to graze on them within 40-ish days.
More than.
What's that?
More than.
Multiple tons. Probably pushing 6 to 8 ton or more of forage per acre on some of these summer annuals. So if grazing and enough grass growth is a concern going into 2025, if you have, you know, an area that you could do stuff like this, being able to supplement those forages that you have, those perennial forages, with some of the annuals, with some of the cover crops, and we're too late for fall planted cover crops, but we'll show some seeding windows here in just a second of some things that we can do. So looking at annual ryegrass and oats, to, you know, maybe look at some early spring grazing that we can save a little bit of our pastures, making sure that they get plenty of regrowth, get a good root system in. Those are a couple that we can look at as far as planting windows. You know, looking at March 1st to April 20th, be able to graze on those within 40 days, 35 to 45 days, be able to get some good growth on them and be able to graze those and help offset your pastures a little bit. Looking at summer annuals, May's not very far away when you sit and think about it, you know, 4 months away. If looking at multiple areas, depending on what you have available on your operation, looking at some of those summer annuals, again, back within that 35 to 45 day window, you saw the amount of growth in that last picture there, being able to graze those to help offset or rest those pastures when you really need to rest them. Because those cool season perennial pastures are gonna go dormant more times, you know, are typically gonna go dormant late June to August because of the temperature spike and the low moisture, so they're gonna slow that growth. So if you have these forages in place, the millets, the sorghum Sudan grasses, you'll be able to pull them off those cool season pastures and be able to graze these. Frost seedings. So looking at frost seedings, we're starting to get up within that window right now. It's a good, fairly cost-effective way to renovate your pastures. With the drought this year, more than likely, we're gonna see a lot of pastures that have low growth in them. So some bare soil exposed would be a good time to start looking at frost seedings, red clovers, white clovers, trefoils are a good option as well. Something with a hard seed that's gonna work down into the soil. That freezing and thawing action will put that down into the soil. I will say I've done it multiple years, some years with high success, some years with not very good success. So it's just gonna depend on, you know, weather, it's gonna depend on that freeze and thaw. So I wish I could sit here and say, yeah, spin it out there, your pastures will look amazing in the spring. That's farming, and that's not how it always works. But like I said, had some success, had some failures at it. You know, making sure that seed is inoculated as well is another important management tool when we start talking about frost seeding those pastures.
Has your experience been that it's better later or better earlier?
I'm trying to think back, because the one was multiple years back. I think it's gonna depend on the freeze and thaw action. that you get. If it's gonna get warm enough, if it's gonna stay cold, for extended periods of times like it's looking like, I'd probably wait a little bit to where it starts to warm up. That 15 to 35, 40 range, where it gets really, really cold and you start to see that honeycomb action on the soil, is when I would probably do it, but we've spun it on snow and had success with it. And we've spun it on with no snow and didn't have any success with it. My guess, when the second time we didn't have any success with it, was we had too much grass cover when we spun it on. Whereas we didn't have as much before. It was a hay field that we did it on, and we went through and grazed it pretty hard and spun it on. That's where we seem to see a lot of the success. So I don't know if I have a great answer for you as to when, but that's really what our goal would be, is trying to get that honeycomb action where it's gonna be warm enough during the day, but get cold enough to freeze at night.
Yeah, I did it one time, it, sprouted it, I think, and we got warm, and then it got really, really cold.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it didn't do very well, so I don't know if that was the reason why, cause it started going and then got real cold and killed it, or what.
It could have been, yeah, there's a lot of different factors that could come into it. You know, hopefully if it starts to germinate, it won't get frozen or thaw out or get popped up out, the seed will get popped up out. Yeah, there's a lot of factors that go into it. Yes?
Alfalfa, I've always heard that alfalfa, if you got a growing stand, even thin stand, and you try to reseed alfalfa in where you already got some alfalfa there, they said that the adult plants have a toxin
Yeah.
that won't allow the seedlings to grow. Is that true, or is that?
I believe it's true, yes. I'm not an alfalfa grower, and when I talk to producers, frost seeding the alfalfa in, from the cost perspective, you know, we don't recommend that because clover's so much cheaper and it's gonna add the nitrogen in the soil. But yeah, the existing alfalfa plants will outcompete and not allow those newer seedlings to grow. So finishing up here, just a couple more slides as far as spring management goes, going through your pastures and taking an inventory of what's there. Looking at, you know, do we have significant amount of bare areas on our pastures? Do we have a significant amount of weed pressure going into the winter? As we start to come out and warm up, seeing what's growing, seeing how that's filling in, and trying to make those management decisions from there. You know, most of us know how our pastures went into the winter and what that would look like, especially if we're starting to make frost seeding decisions. If they were bare, might be a good time to really start looking at that. But taking that inventory and trying to make those management decisions based off how we're coming out. I can't stress this enough, when we're coming out of drought, making sure that we allow those plants to establish before we start grazing them again. Because what that'll do is, if we overgraze in the summer, we overgraze in the fall, and continue to graze, that root system's gonna be depleted, those plants are gonna be stressed. So if we start seeing those green shoots coming up in the spring, we're like, all right, we're gonna turn them out before we're ready, we're just gonna perpetuate that overgraze situation and start having a negative effect on those roots, and we're gonna start seeing a lot more undesirable plants. So making sure, if you have the ability to let those pastures rest as long as possible and those plants to establish, you're gonna have more success in the long run. It's gonna take time to recover from this drought. It's not gonna happen all in this first year, but starting that recovery process into this year and into 2026 is gonna be important, that we don't have overgrazed pastures, we don't have significant amount of weed pressure, because I suspect, you know, Bob probably does too, some of the other resource professionals in here probably are gonna expect, we're probably gonna see a lot of weeds this year, just because of the bare area, the open ground that we had. So being able to take that inventory, know what you have, know how we take care of some of those situations. And again, can't stress bullet number 2 enough. Delay that grazing until plants become established. Applying fertilizer if appropriate, looking at soil tests, see what your pastures need. applying the fertilizer as needed, controlling those weeds, again, just like we talked about earlier, making sure those weeds don't compete for nutrients and moisture with the desirable plants that we want, or to shade them out. Reseed, renovate any drought damaged pastures, having an assessment. There's a lot of good resource professionals in this room. If you're not sure, multiple people in here are willing to walk those pastures with you and help you make those management decisions free of charge. And continue with proper grazing management. And it's almost like we planned this. Bob's gonna talk about a grazing plan. Develop a grazing plan. Having that plan in place, being able to reference it and say, all right, this is what we were thinking about, this is how we want to manage it, this is how we want to move through our farm and our operation, is going to help you make those decisions. It's going to help you plan those areas out from a soil standpoint, from a production standpoint. You may not refer to it every day, but having that plan in place, being able to look at that, address any of those resource concerns that you have, making sure we have adequate water, making sure we have adequate forage for those animals, it is going to be important, and the grazing plan helps do that. If you work with any of the agencies, ODA, NRCS, Pheasants Forever, any of the other agencies, this is what your grazing management plan will look like. Looking at the planned grazing system, looking at livestock forage balances. This is the template. It doesn't have to be this. And I know if you Google some of this stuff online, there's a bunch of different options out there that folks have. But having that plan in place is going to be important as we move forward. And I talked about developing a system, and Jason will probably cover this, and Bob will probably touch on it, but being able to fill in those gaps in the forage, that's really what I wanted to talk about when we start talking about grazing management strategies. So filling in these gaps. So this is our traditional cool season pastures. This is when the production is for us, our fescues, our orchard grasses, our bluegrasses, clovers. This is when our typical production is, from March to June. It starts to have a summer slump there. We still have production, but it's reduced to about 2/3 production in spring, 1/3 of the production for cool season plants in the fall. So by filling in those gaps, looking at these additional forages to be able to fill those gaps and extend that grazing season as far as you possibly can before we start feeding any stored forages, hay, etc. So I know at our place, we've done a halfway decent job filling in the December, January, February. We're working to try and fill in that gap in the middle to hopefully extend it. And Jason's going to talk a little bit about at the end today about warm season natives. Those really shine this year for producers. Continue to produce. They put down a deep root. And not to steal everything that you're saying, but he's going to touch on that, and that's what that would do in here, and be able to pull off of those cool season pastures when they're at times going to be stressed within this area. That's June, July, August time frame. That's why I don't like the fly-ins and everything. I never know how far I have to go. But extending that grazing season and having a diverse forage system is going to reduce the cost in hay. It's going to allow you to spread those nutrients out across those pastures and help provide grazing for those animals at multiple times throughout the year and have a significant amount of forage for it. Are there any questions? Yes. Go ahead.
Might be stepping on Bob's presentation, but do you try to harvest any hay off of your pastures that you early, like May, where grass is growing extremely well? Do you try to do that? I mean, is your stocking against it based off when you said 17 acres plus that? Do you try to, for that whole 17 acres, to take it through the whole year? I guess what I'm saying, like, in a normal year, I've taken a quarter of, in my paddocks, a quarter of it, made hay off of it in mid-May, and actually had a month's worth of hay to feed those cows in the wintertime. what gets dicey is getting that particular paddock to grow back,
Right.
because of weather and, you know, when to cut it, when not to.
I'll go from a personal side. We do not make any off of our pastures. We have enough hay that's off-site. What we do is we try to move them through as quick as we possibly can and maintain as much vegetative growth as we can. Because from that standpoint, and you kind of hit the nail on the head, you make it in May, you're looking June, July for that regrowth, and it might not be till August till it really starts to kick in for that regrowth. So you've taken that grazing out for that 3-month-ish window until you get in there. I'm not saying that the way you're doing it is wrong, but that's some of the management considerations. If you need the hay, I would make it and manage it that way. You can feed a little bit in the summer to
Well,
get
it's
you
more
through.
of the fact, you know, as you get to that paddock, you got orchard grass that's 4 feet tall,
Mhm.
and they're laying on more of it than they're eating.
Yeah.
You know, and so are you getting anything there? I mean, if it goes to seed, then it's not wanna try to regrow either.
I'll answer and then I'll kick the ball for this one, but, I'm not worried about it going to seed at our place, you know, we're trying to group them and try to get that mash down and put that organic matter back into the soil is what our goal is at home, putting some of that excess seed, into the soil. It will slow the growth, but you will get the grow back. We've not run into any issues with it. If you can rotate through and minimize that as much as possible, I think that's a good thing, but I don't worry about the trample and putting that into the ground, because you're building that organic matter, you have that cover there, you're keeping that soil cool. I see it as a benefit with the trample, because you will get that regrowth, you will get new tillers coming out, and I see it as a benefit. That's my personal preference and what I've seen. The farm in Carroll County, he treats it the same way. He's not worried about the overgrowth and then going to seed, because they're going through and trying to trample it into the soil as much as we can. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Bob, or not.
One of the things we're trying to do is a summer stockpile. Taking what you make for hay and then grazing it in July and August. I do a lot like Jarrod is, I graze everything April and early May to try to slow down those seed heads. I'll be an antagonist and say, if you're cutting it for hay, you're probably cutting seed stems too. And they're not eating them in the bale. So it's, I'd rather have it out in the field, I guess. In your case, if you're feeding hay, you're hauling it back out as manure. And, so it's, and by keeping those plants, if you're cutting it for hay, you're cutting all the leaves. And you're usually cutting it shorter than what you should be grazing it. So you're slowing the regrowth. The regrowth, you always grow more grass in a pasture field than you will in a hay field. Assuming that everything else is the same, the fertility, the soil type, and the forage stand is all the same, and it's because of the cutting height. Most of us cut our hay shorter than what we should graze it. So your recovery time from a hay harvest is longer than a grazing event, if that makes sense to you all.
I needed to get back to my notes, but, I just wanted to bring this up. As far as the hay production standpoint, for every 1,000 pounds that you pull off of that pasture, you're losing 18 pounds of nitrogen, 6 pounds of phosphorus, and 26 pounds of potassium. So from my management standpoint, I'm trying to keep that onto the pasture as much as I can, unless we're gonna go back and supplement that with fertilizer. If we need the hay, we have cut it before. It's just, you know, it's a management decision during that time period. But from our management standpoint at home, we wanna keep the nutrients there. If we can, you know, just concentrate our inputs onto the hay ground, we try to do that, and then trample that organic matter back into the soil as much as we possibly can.
It's kind of basically the same question, but I would wonder when it gets ranked like that, if you're better off leaving it standing, or if you should brush hog it or clip it high or whatever you wanna call it? Or any benefit one way or the other?
I think that mash is gonna depend on how well you can group your cattle, if you really wanna get that knocked down. If you can't, we're a little understocked, we go through and flip, is what we do, but, again, it really comes down to management preference.
On the good years, I mean, it gets ranked in a hurry.
It does, and it did this year, early, it got ranked really quick, with the amount of moisture and growth that we had this spring. It got ranked quick, so we went through and tried to mash as much as we could. We even divided our paddocks yet again, trying to get the mash, and then what didn't mash down, we went ahead and clipped about, we got those blocks for our hydraulics, about 6 inches, 6 to 8 inches is what we tried to do. I'm not saying that, what I was doing was right, there's multiple ways to go about it, but, trying to think, maintaining that, the animals out there recycling those nutrients is what our goal is, with this. If we could get away from clipping, I would love to get away from clipping, but that's more of an aesthetic thing for us and, trying to keep things looking a certain way. And that's just producer preference at that point. But no, I'm not worried about the pastures getting rank.
As far as the frost seeding, I've been trying in the hayfields to try to get some clover work in. Again, one year it's good, one year it's bad. And I mean, I know I've probably got, what is too much growth for frost seeding? I'm gonna have more growth probably in a hayfield than you would in a pasture field, but not.
Depending on fertility, yeah.
Cause I made it late because I needed, when we started to cool off and got a couple rains, actually the hayfields took off and I made something late September, first part of October, I think it was. So I know there's some growth out there, but I was just curious if you run something like a pasture hair or irrigator, followed by call-pack or something after you frost seeded it, if that would help work it into that ground or whatever.
It would. I would say if you're broadcasting too much growth, as if that, say we're here and that seed can't get down to the soil, or if it gets down to the soil, it can't get the sunlight. So, if we're down here, I think we got a better chance of the broadcast being successful.
I've probably got 2, maybe 3 inches.
Yeah, that'd be close there. I would say 6 to 8 inches, definitely too much. That 2 to 3, 4, I think you would probably have to see some success there. We've had some people drill it in, and that seems to be more successful.
I guess that was my other question. If you can get the conditions right with a no-till drill,
Yeah.
go ahead and drill it in.
Yeah, I think you would see better success with the frost seeding by drilling it in if you can get the right conditions, and that's gonna be the if of it all. But yeah, usually if we have excessive growth, we don't see successful stands during a frost seeding situation.
And I guess the other thing is, I can remember my grandfather, going back to oats, he said if you couldn't get them planted in February, never plant them in March, wait for April 1st. And I wonder if that'd be the same thing with the clovers or anything like that.
Yeah, I think so. And then you may wanna go in and graze it kinda hard if you're gonna frost seed it, in April, because those grasses are gonna shoot up, and outcompete those clovers almost immediately, cause they're gonna come on fairly quick. So if you wait till April to do the clovers, I think you're gonna have to get a hard graze on that and then let it rest for extended periods of time.